Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be tackling life's greatest questions, and that being life, the universe, and God. And the ideas that have been bounced around for since the dawn of humankind, and then my thoughts on everything. And so this is going to be a very gigantic video. It's going to span. It's probably going to be a 2-3 part video. Just disregard this. So I end up ditching this idea because segregating each subject into different videos just wouldn't make sense. They all intermingle into more or less the same subject anyways, the way that I talk about it at least. So it's just going to be one giant, almost 2-hour video. So you'll just have that to look forward to instead. And I think that'll just make things easier for all of us, including myself. So here you go. So starting with the idea of life, right? So something that is has always bothered me, right? Because my background is I come from a very pragmatic, logical background, and so religion was never really pushed upon me, and so I've as a kid I was always curious about the reality of things and what's real and what's not. From a very early age, I questioned the existence of Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, and I would just buck my parents about it all day until they would just cave in and tell me those things aren't real. So we don't have that same luxury with these bigger questions on life, the universe, and God. We don't have anyone to go to that can definitively tell us the objective truth. So as humans, we have to just kind of wonder why we're here and what is this all for and all that. So that's kind of my background on this. I don't really have any biases. I've come from a pretty clean slate. No idea was really inserted in my head. My dad is a very practical, pragmatic guy, so a lot of that stuff rubs off on me, I suppose. He's always taught me to think for myself in a logical way. But I didn't have. But he never pressured me into one idea or the other, right? And so from an early age, I questioned the existence of God and how we're even here, right? And I thought over the years, those ideas kind of became more complicated and how they evolved in my head. And one thing I just can't get over is just like the more and more I've learned about everything, all the events and sequences that it took that had to line up in order for us to be here, or even for me to be here, is is insane. And so I'm like, why do I get to experience life, right? Why me? Why? And anyone can ask that question. Is like, why me? Why do I get to experience life? Why? And so there's a mathematical problem with this, right? And I've tried to narrow it down into a sort of analogy that would make sense to kind of digest and paint the picture that I'm trying to the problem that we run into. And so I like to think of it this way, right? Let's just pretend that you are outside of this universe and you're with another entity, person, whatever. And you're looking down at this universe before it even starts, before the creation moment, right, of the Big Bang, before any of it. And so the button is paused on this, right? So, and before the person or entity that is with you hits play, you're you're sort of talking to it, and it's explaining to you that your one shot at life is the exact moment that you were born. And so before they hit play and run the simulation, you get to kind of see what everything that has to line up, everything that it takes for you to be born. So you see all the sequence of events. You see, of course, the Big Bang happening, and all the forces that go into that have to be exact, and the formation of stars and galaxies and solar systems and the formation of Earth, the moon, everything, right? Then you get to the biological part of it, right? Because those are just like the fundamental nature of particles and atoms and molecules and all that stuff. But then you get to the biology of things, and then you look at every evolutionary mutation that had to have happened, from microorganisms to more complicated and advanced species, all the way up to the events of the dinosaurs and the cataclysmic event that made them go extinct. Had that not happened, and then the rise of Homo erectus, and then them surviving and having certain catastrophes happen, because if certain catastrophes didn't happen, that would throw off the entire course of human history and everything, and then that might not cause you to have been born, and your parents' 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 parents, all the way down, had, everyone had to have had met at the specific time that they did, conceived a child at the specific time that they did. All those sequence events had to have lined up perfectly. Maybe there was some wiggle room for a few seconds here and there, but everything had to go exactly the way it was supposed to in order for you to have been born, right? That was your only window of life and your only chance to experience life, right? And by the way, this simulation, when they go to hit play, it is randomized every time. So when they hit play, that scenario isn't likely to happen at all, because if it's all random, I mean, at the start of the Big Bang, maybe nothing happens because the forces of gravity and the strong nuclear force and all that stuff is slightly off, and there's too many antimatter particles versus matter, and so they destroy themselves, and then there's nothing that can be created. So when they hit play, there's a very high chance that it'll be a dud universe, right? Very high chance. And so you're looking at the situation, and you're talking to this person, and they go, okay, would you bet on your life? Like, if I hit play right now, what do you think your chances of getting to experience life is? And you would say very, very, very close to absolute zero. Okay, on the first shot, no way. But let's assume that they say, okay, well, what if you have an infinite amount of chances to run the simulation, right? An infinite amount of times to hit play, run the simulation. What would your answer be then? And then you would say, well, there's a much higher, there's an absolute chance that I will get that shot. I don't know when. I don't know if it's on the 100th click or 100,000th or million or billion or trillion or quadrillion or how many plays it takes. But eventually we will see a universe that everything lines up in the sequences that it does in order for me to have my window of opportunity. Then absolutely I would bet on my life. Yeah, I'll take that deal. That's the kind of scenario that I imagine happening. Because that's the only scenario that really would make sense. Because if you were to tell anyone that my only shot at life was a lottery ticket, one pull out of a hat type thing, where you only had the one chance at life, that would be insane. I don't believe that that's the case. That your chances are so low. I mean, people talk about your chances of winning the life lottery is astronomically low, right? Again, everything up to your birth, every event had to have happened in the way that it did, which is insane. When you think about just the celestial bodies moving in space and colliding with each other and the way that they form and didn't form, if any of that stuff was off, and this had been going on for, what, 10 billion years before the Earth was um, starting to form? Because I think the Earth, or no, that's wrong. Because about, what, the Earth is about 4 or 5 billion years old, and the universe as a whole is around close to 14 billion years old. So, yeah, everything up leading up to the Earth had to have gone right. All these celestial bodies, all the molecules, I mean, everything for you to be here. When you put that into perspective, you realize just how insane your life is for you to experience life, right? And that's just celestial bodies moving around, okay? And the fundamental laws of physics having to have worked, right? Okay, you get past that. Well, now it's biology's turn. And here on Earth, 4 billion years ago, if those events didn't line up, you're still fighting with genetics and mutation and all that stuff. And so I never there's a fundamental math problem that we have to face with our life, and that is exactly that. It's, what are the chances of you being here? So that to me is significant, and it should be significant for anyone. Okay, if this was, the one hat, the one pull out of the hat type of deal where you got it on the first try, we're very lucky to be here. That is extremely significant. But even if that's not the case, it's still extremely significant. I think it's less significant than getting it on the first try for sure. That's extremely impressive. But it doesn't take away from the fact that you if you had an infinite amount of tries, that's still even awesome that you could even do that, right? The fact that there's something here to allow you to do that than nothing, right? Because there could just be a universe of nothing. And so that's kind of where I was at. That's where I'm at now with that sort of thing, right? That's the kind of analogy I like to use. Another one would be like, um, whatever possibility that is. It's like one in an insane, probably Googleplex number of you being here. Let's just say you had a dice of that number, whatever that is, Google, whatever. It's it's a massive number of dice, in a gigantic bucket, and you're in the same scenario, and the person next to you is talking about, all right, so if all these die in this bucket, when dropped onto the ground, land on one, all of them have to land on one, then you will be granted the gift of life. That's the same kind of scenario as I'm talking about, is like a one-shot chance of dumping the bucket, all the dice landing on one. What are the chances, right? It's not going to happen on the first try. But if you have an infinite amount of chances to do that, then your chances are 100%. It will happen at some point if allowed to go to infinity, right? If you have an unlimited amount of chances. So, anyways, that's my two different analogies there for what are the chances of us being here, right? It kind of puts it into perspective and helps kind of illustrate the rest of everything else that I'm going to get into. So, the next the next thing with life, because life is a huge topic. I mean, these are all gigantic topics, but we can get into the meaning of life. Okay, from there on. So you're here, now what? Well, so then what is the purpose of all this? Like, why is, for one, why did I end up in the universe like this? Why couldn't it have been anything else? And again, why me? Why do I even get a chance at life? Why not someone else? What do I do? What am I supposed to do here? And so there's the practical sense of getting the meaning of life, which the practical sense is really just like as any species, right? Yeah, we are just kind of made to reproduce ourselves so that way our species continues on, right? That's what we've been doing this entire time. That's what every species on this planet does. Animals, ants, insects, just everything does this. So that way it's just a battle for survival constantly. And obviously as humans, we have a lot of advantages with our intelligence because we clearly ruled the planet in a lot of ways. So in a practical sense, it's just, okay, reproduction of our species so that way we can continue on. And a pretty interesting concept, which I think was, I don't remember where I saw this from. It was a YouTube video. I watch a lot of science and philosophy videos on YouTube. So I don't remember which one it's from. It's maybe a Star Talk episode with Neil deGrasse Tyson, or maybe not. I don't remember, unfortunately. But the idea was that it's kind of interesting when you narrow it down to just our DNA is what's being preserved over the ages, and we as humans are the vessels of that. We're preserving the DNA, not so much our species, but our DNA, which is our species. But if you boil it down to just like we're saving our genetic code, and our genetic code is really what's important, and that's what brings us along, and we are just vessels of transporting it from generation to generation. Is kind of an interesting way to put it, I guess, because you could see it that way too, and that's totally viable as well. But this goes for anything, right? And also going back to the thought experiment that I had with the scenario with, being able to look at the universe from the outside perspective and rolling the dice. Well, why did you get a shot at being a human being? Why couldn't it, like, your chances of being an insect should be astronomically higher because there are more insects on this planet, but they're simple creatures. They have very simple functions. Not to say that they're stupid. I'm not saying that, but their functions are different. Their perception of reality and their intelligence level is very limited versus a human being. Like, as a human being, not only do you get a shot at being a human being, but you have a shot at a vast plethora of knowledge that no other species has, right? You know that you can go below the ocean and explore that, whereas a fish cannot explore anything outside of the ocean, right? They just can't. They can't study outside of their realm, right? We can go into space. We can study that. We can create complex relationships with each other and create ideas and apply those ideas. We have the ability to do so with our opposable thumbs and things. So we can create and manipulate and do things to our environment that no other species and creature could do, which is incredible. So not only were you granted the gift of life, which is one thing, right? It's one thing to be like an ant or something, but it's a totally another thing to be a part of an intelligent species where you can absolutely control your environment in a lot of significant ways. I think that's another thing that I'd like to highlight in this idea, is that you as a person have a lot of things going for you. The opportunities that you have are unlike any other species. So that's something to really think about as well. That only adds to the idea of like, why am I here and what are the chances? It just gets crazier when you think about it like that. But so, anyways, kind of stepping away from that and going back into the meaning of life. So, in a practical sense, we're just carrying on our DNA. Okay. So, what about in a social sense, right? Like, what are your social obligations? Well, that is entirely up to ourselves and what that is. Like, what role do I fit in society? How do I contribute? Do I want to contribute? What do I believe in? What do I not believe in? We create all these social constructs for ourselves, but that's more of like, this is where we enter the idea of like, okay, this is kind of up to us now, right? It's your meaning, your place is completely subjective. Like, it's not from a practical sense. It's more of like, maybe back in the day it was different. Well, we know that it was different when you're just surviving, right? You have all the elements against you. You don't have much control over it. So you're just surviving. And we still get a glimpse of that today. We can't completely control our environment. There are tornadoes and severe weather, inclement weather that we can't control. And even just like going outside into the woods, that poses a potential threat to your existence. Just if you get bitten by a snake, that's super poisonous and you could die. So we still have to worry about survival. Like, that's not that doesn't go completely out the door. But as we go through life and we as a species accumulate knowledge and get better at technology and science, it's becoming increasingly more easy to survive. So the practicality of like surviving, that kind of, and just carrying on our species, that idea kind of goes away. So we transition into, well, we're more in a comfortable lifestyle. Food is provided, shelter is provided, water is provided, your basic necessities are provided. So what do you want to do now, right? So I think the meaning of life is, well, it's entirely subjective, because if you're put in a position where you can decide those things, whereas if you had lived 2,000 years ago, your meaning of life would be different. It might involve wars with another country, or just basic survival, right? So the meaning of life and the purpose of life has changed over time due to the environment. So it's completely subjective. That's something that we need to just get off the table right away, is that there is no objective way to live your life, right? Because you can say all day that, well, it's creating and inventing things. Well, okay, that moves our species forward as a whole, sure. That not necessarily what it is. That doesn't have to be the meaning of life, because there was a point where there was none of that. It was just surviving, just basic survival of just, if we reset, if civilization resets tomorrow, like a giant asteroid hits the Earth or solar flare wipes out the grid, a lot of people are going to die. Maybe almost everyone will die, but so then that your purpose in life or your meaning of life automatically changes. It's survival mode now, right? You don't get the luxury, you don't get the option of creation and invention. That's over. It's now, how do I survive with what I have? So life is subjective. That is important, right? So no objectivity to that. Everyone creates their own destinies and their own version of what they think they should do, and that's great. That's how it should be. right? Everyone is a player in this game, and we get to choose what we do with what we have. Okay, with what we're given as well. So, yeah, I don't believe in any objective idea of that. That doesn't exist. It just doesn't. And so going into the next subject here, which is reality is subjective, right? So I'm no longer really talking about life and our purpose and say here, but I'm more talking about just the reality of things around us. Okay, so the physics, the fundamentals of all that is also subjective, right? So the more we kind of think about ourselves and our consciousness and this vessel that we're in, which is our bodies, the more you kind of when you look more inward, the more you realize that everyone is isolated in their view of reality. Okay, so I'll get into that and what I mean by that. But it is objectively true that reality is subjective and it's perceived subjectively. There is no overarching objective view on the universe. There is, but a lot of it boils down to subjectivity. So, an example: the way that I would see a color, right? Just example, we use a visual of like red, right? So I see something as a certain hue of red. Maybe it's like a dark, deep dark red, and it's a very specific hue. And you and the next person and the next person look at this object that is also you would say is red, but it's just a slightly different hue, just slightly different, and that can come down to your biological thing, right? That your receptors of this color of light color is just slightly tuned differently, so you see a different type color. Well, eventually, you ask enough people, and someone might say that color is different than red, right? And maybe red isn't the best example, but I do know there's people that like would see they see the grass as blue instead of green. I know people like that where their color palette is different than others. So in a reality where you're a person who sees green grass, what's supposed to be green, because everyone else sees it as green, you see it as blue. Well, that's your reality. Grass is blue for you, right? And no one can take that away from you. I mean, everyone can say you're crazy and that you're wrong, but who's right would be the question. Well, when you gather enough people and the majority are saying, "Well, this is green," and you are just an outlier. Okay, sure. But we evolved that way. What if we evolved the other way, where the majority sees green grass as blue grass, and then there are a minority of people that see it as green and not blue? Who's right? Who's wrong? So again, that's just another subjective viewpoint, right? And that's just one example. Another example would be like you take a human and their sensory images, their visuals, their auditory, the way they smell things, versus an insect like a fly, right? So, well, vastly different experiences, right? Well, a fly zips through the air very fast. They move faster, so the things around them move slower. That's why it's very hard to hit a fly if you're trying to hit a fly, because their sensory images are tuned differently. I mean, for one, they have a ton of eyes, so they can damn near see 360, right, around them. They move much faster and freely than we do because we're grounded onto the ground, whereas they're flying around and they're smaller, and so they just move faster. They're more aerodynamic than us. So just even having the ability to fly is a whole different experience than a human being. The way they see things, like I said, would be totally different than a person. I mean, imagine if you could see more than just in front of you or directly where you're looking, right? So, and then the way that they feel, the way they have different senses. Bugs typically have, I don't remember what it's called, but they can kind of pick up on scents and tracks. You know, like a dog can pick up on a scent trail and pheromones. That's what it's called. So bugs emit pheromones, so they can kind of communicate to each other in ways that us humans wouldn't recognize. There are beliefs, and I don't know if this is like proven or not, that birds have a whole nother sixth sense of, they're more in tune with the Earth's magnetic field, so they always know where north is, and they're kind of in tune with all that. So there's all, a bunch of different differences, and even like as a fly, for that example, you go to smell a pile of shit and you're just like, that's disgusting. I'm not going near it, because your body and through evolution knows that that stuff is potentially dangerous, filled with bacteria that can get you sick and possibly kill you, so you stay away from that stuff, right? It smells bad for a reason. Whereas that same fly would go towards that and eat off of it, and that's its source of nutrients and life. And so shit obviously wouldn't smell bad to it. It that's a good smell. That's what it is looking for. So shit might smell like freshly baked pizza. I don't know. It definitely doesn't smell the same as what a human would perceive it, or most other animals. Even dogs kind of sniff around there and they're interested in it. So reality is subjective. It's perceived by the individual. So is my view and look on things wrong compared to a fly? I mean, there are more flies on this earth than there are people. Are the flies right and we're wrong? No, right? It's all individually based on the experience that you are having with this vessel, this body that you're in. So no one's wrong, no one's right, and that puts us in an interesting spot. And so, in order for objectivity to exist is basically through peer review. So, an example going back to like a rock, we all may experience this rock differently. It feels different from one person to another. Another creature experiences it differently. But the important thing is that it's there, right? We can all verify that it is there. It may feel different and look different to us all, from person to person, from creature to creature, but we all know it's there because it's in the way. We can sense that it is there in one way or another. Okay, so that's an objective reality, but that is done through peer review, right? What's interesting is people who have like schizophrenia or some sort of mind-altering thing that kind of gives them hallucinations. It's like, who's to say if they're really crazy or not? I mean, just because we don't see it, and that's not our reality, it's their reality. They see this figure standing there, and they're having a conversation with them, even if it's in their head. And we would say that they are crazy because we use objective peer review. Like, I don't see the same thing, the next person over doesn't see the same thing, and the next person over and like 1,000 other people don't see the same thing as this one person is seeing. So they get ousted as someone who's just crazy, or it's just there's something wrong with them. And but maybe there's nothing wrong with them. They've maybe entered into a different channel of like a different wavelength, and they have like a bigger sense of awareness than most of us. That's that's just speculation. Of course, I can't verify if that's true or not, and we won't really know that. But who's to say that they're actually not seeing something that we all just don't have access to, or they have like an extra sense that we can't access, don't have access to, right? So just that's an example of objective reality versus subjective, right? So then you would say, okay, well, if none of us are wrong or none of us is right, then what is the objective truth? Like, if you could just peel back all the sensory bullshit, what does what is this rock supposed to look like? What is it supposed to feel like? What's it supposed to smell like? Right? Well, again, there's no one way to do that unless you had a filter that let you absorb all the smells on that rock, right? And feel every texture on that rock in every way possible, and see it in different colors. I mean, what would that look like? How would you even go about like seeing what is the true color of this rock? Is it supposed to be red? Is it supposed to be gray? Is it supposed to be, what is it supposed to be? What is the objective truth? If you were, I guess, God looking at it, what would that look like? What would that piece of shit smell like? Was it supposed to smell like? We'll never really know that. So it's interesting when you kind of break the reality down into those parts of just subjectivity, because that's what it is at the end of the day, right? We all have slightly different experiences than each other, and some of us have way different experiences than each other, right? So that's a mind-bending concept right there. So the next part of this that I want to get into, now that we've established all this, is the idea of NDEs, right? And what that stands for is near-death experiences, because this kind of may help guide us in a certain direction as to what's really going on once we die, right? These people, they get very close to death, like completely dead, but then they come back to be able to tell us what they experienced. And this is something I was getting into a lot recently over the past few weeks. I've been listening to audiobooks on them and really diving into this idea and of all this, and it's fascinating. I suggest you guys go do the same thing, because you can form your own opinions on it, and it's just a great thing to listen to. It's makes you wonder, right? And out of the few audiobooks that I have one that's Life After Life. I think seven reasons. Let me see. Let me pull it up. 7 reasons that there is proof of life after life. Yep. And so there's 7 reasons to believe in an afterlife. That's kind of the subtitle of it. And it takes all these different. There's like a ton of different accounts of people who experience an NDE, and they live to be able to obviously talk about it. And this guy, Raymond Moody, he really dives into objectivity of this all, because it's very easy to form biases if you come from any other background of like religious background. You would just kind of insert your own sort of biases and agendas to kind of promote the idea of your biblical God being the right God, whatever. But he comes from a very pragmatic, practical background, which I like, because it's kind of a clean slate without any biases. So that's a great one. Proof of Heaven by Eben Alexander. That's where it kind of started me on this whole kick, was this book. And I was first made aware of it I was just scrolling through YouTube, and then he was explaining like his out-of-body experience. He's a neurosurgeon, a brain neurosurgeon, right? So he works on surgical procedures for the brain. So obviously he knows his stuff about the brain. You've got to as a brain surgeon, you got to know what each function of the brain is and what it serves and how to diagnose and treat it, any conditions in there. And he goes through one, and his experience throughout this is very interesting, very interesting. And I like these two books a lot. And then he also has another book called Living in a Mindful Universe. That's his sort of second book. And so these three books, I think, have the best unbiased views on kind of what's going on, right? Like they really dig into it and look at it from an objective standpoint. Now, Eben has become more biased since his event, which makes sense. I mean, to him, it was super real and the most real experience he's ever had, and he's really bought into the idea that this did happen to him. All the events that he describes, and I'll get into. So he is now from a biased standpoint, whereas Raymond Moody, I don't believe he ever went through a near-death experience, so he's just kind of recounting and conducting experiments himself on all these people that have. So these are just stories that were given to him, and he conducted research on and put it all together into a fantastic book. But he is even convinced, even though he himself has not gone through one, he's convinced of a life after life, as his book is titled. And this other one that I've been listening to is Imagine the God of Heaven. Now this is by John Burke, and he's got he claims there's like 1,000 different NDE accounts that he compiled into this book, and there's quite a lot because it's just one after the other, and he just kind of breaks it down. He comes from a pretty biased standpoint, a Christian view of it, and I think the subtitle of the book is what is it? It's something about like feeling love and appreciated. Let me pull it up real quick. Oh, yeah, God's revelation and the love you've always wanted. Yeah, the love you've always wanted. So to me, that just seems like a very biased viewpoint on this, and it almost kind of seems like it stems from an area of insecurity. That's kind of what I'm picking up, because to even put, the love that you've always wanted suggests that he may have been missing that, or you are missing that in your life. So you gravitate towards this book, and as a Christian or anyone of faith, gravitate towards this book, and then you'll be able to, with that already kind of perspective of like, oh, I'm missing something, and this is filling that void. And then he's talking about all these NDEs, and then sprinkling in his own biases and agendas to kind of feed these biases. And I'm not a fan of that because it's, it's not as objective as it could be. It's not just kind of looking at it and being like, well, for one, okay, sure, some of these NDE experiences could have just been made up. That's something you absolutely have to kind of think about. But he is right. He said that even out of 1,000 of these, if a handful of them are wrong, what does that say about the rest? And how they all line up and how similar they are. And that's right. That's absolutely right. But what I don't like is the reading the biblical passage on John said this, and Isaiah said this, and how it relates to that NDE experience and all this stuff. I think it kind of just muddies the whole experience that I'm trying to have. I'm just trying to gather my own opinions on this stuff, and every other story just inserts a biblical passage and Christianity this and Christianity that. And if that's your faith, that's fine. But I didn't really like that. Whereas Proof of Life After Life is more objective, so I lean more towards that one. But I do appreciate the book by John Burke because, on his Imagine God of Heaven, because he provides so many different experiences of NDEs, so I can kind of diagnose that and just kind of ignore the mumbo jumbo of the religious point of view. Not that I guess I don't appreciate it as much as a person of faith would, right? But okay, getting into these NDEs. So one common thing across all these, and I do suggest that you guys give these books a read or a listen to if you have Audible. It's totally worth your time, because if you're the type of person who is trying to explore the idea of life, the universe, and God, and everything, these are important to open your mind to, because, well, this is part of the answer that you're chasing, so why not try to, you know, this is in the realm of what you're looking for, so why not try to study it? And this has, always been a big thing for me, and things that bothered me from the beginning. I'm the type of person to ask so many questions and really, really just scratch at the idea and not give up and just really get to the bottom of it. And that's just the type of person I am. Well, from my personal understanding and viewpoint on this stuff is, I do think there's something there. Okay. I still remain skeptical of these experiences. The most compelling one, and the one I'm just going to kind of stick to, is the one of Eben Alexander. So the brain neurosurgeon. So his is the most compelling and probably the best baseline for the most objective, probably, indie experience that anyone can have that is recorded. Because he died, was in a coma for 7 days, was clinically dead for those 7 days. Very little brain activity, like only the bare minimum basic stuff. I don't even know if that was the case, but definitely no like hyperactive brain activity anywhere on the monitors, because they were recording his brain activity because he had died of E. coli meningitis, which is a brain-eating disease. It's a bacteria that just eats away at your brain tissue, and all that. It's very scary, but obviously he survived, and out of the 7-day coma, he was, able to regain his functions incredibly, somehow regain everything. So, but during those 7 days, he goes through a pretty incredible experience that he describes to us, because he is convinced that in no way possible was he able to go through and feel and see and do the things that he did while it being all in his body, all in his head. Like, he's convinced that he had an out-of-body experience and was transported into another realm, another dimension, another world, whatever you want to call it, away from here. And that's compelling because, well, there's evidence of that. There's no brain function going on their equipment, so you have that. Okay, so that lines up. My only thing is, like, maybe there's just more to our biology that we don't understand, Even if there is very small brain function there, is maybe that the cause of it? People would say it's a DMT spike. Well, that can't be the case, because there was none. But even low levels of brain activity, can that cause an illusion? Or what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of what I'm trying to think of. Not an illusion, but more of like what you would see if you were in a desert, and a hallucination. Oh, geez, that was tough to get my brain to think. Yeah, so one of those, like, are you having one of those? And that's possible, maybe. I don't know enough about this brain science stuff and no one really can fully say that they understand the human brain either. So, that's a fair statement, I suppose, of, like, can low levels of brain activity, if he had any, could that contribute to what he was seeing? And he didn't have an out-of-body experience. It was all in the body. Or, maybe even different parts of the body, other organs can contribute to that. I've heard, I don't know, this was a long time ago, and I haven't really looked into it, but when people have organ transfers, right, like they gain someone else's kidney or liver or whatever, they sort of start to have memories of that person's life here and there, which is weird, I don't know, again, how credible that is, if that's even a thing. But if that's even a thing, and we have to kind of jump into the hypothetical, is maybe is his liver or heart or anything like that attributing to this illusion that he has of like seeing things, hearing things, or does your brain have to be a necessary part to make those things work at a high function? I don't know. I don't know, and I don't think anyone can really say. But that's a possibility. Okay, just to maybe kind of dispute that. Anyways, so he goes through what he calls this earthworm's eye view. Right, as soon as he's dead, he goes through this earthworm's eye view, which is sort of like if you were an earthworm moving through dirt, or just a murky surface, or a jello-like substance. It's just murky and dark, and he's just moving through here. He feels free-spirited, like he's not necessarily grounded to anything, like, 2 legs and is walking, but more of just kind of floating, maneuvering through this, from what I understand. He hears kind of what sounds like an anvil pounding throughout the entire environment, like this metal pounding, I guess, that he described as an anvil, like someone with a hammer hitting an anvil. And then eventually, like this light comes in, and it's a melodic. It's got a melody to it, right? A very specific melody that he said he can't replicate here because it can't really be replicated, which is interesting, I would say. And you'll, as I describe this, you'll hear a lot of like these things that can't be described, sort of thing, where like you would have to have another sensory, another sense to be able to identify it or hear it or see it, or you know and that doesn't exist here on Earth because we live in a 3D world, so it's just different. So that's interesting. I will say that it's very interesting that it can't be replicated because it's out of our realm of being able to recreate it. So we just can't do it in this universe. No matter the amount of physics and whatever we have, can't replicate it. So big bright light and this melody, and then all of a sudden he's transported and shot through it, and on the other side he's kind of in this heavenly place with butterflies and other spirits and just beautiful nature. And then there's this beautiful woman who's staring at him, and it kind of acts like his guide and is telling him that everything is fine, you can't do any harm, everything is just fine, right? And you are loved, you will always be loved. That's the message that she kind of gave him. And she's like this human. She's a human woman, and she's talking to him. And as far as he knows, he's not a human. He doesn't really know what he is. I don't know if he ever really questioned that, but he did say that he wasn't bound to anything physical like we are. So being free spirited in a literal, I guess, and figurative sense was nice and very different because, as you could imagine, again, if you were like a fly and you were able to fly around, then that would be kind of nice to not have to be grounded to this earth. You could just kind of float around. So, anyways, when he said he was put back into his body, he felt like a prisoner. He was restricted again. It took him some time to kind of get used to being in his body again, which again, very interesting, right? So, anyways, he's after he spent some time there, he is then able to, I guess, maneuver, transport. I don't know how he was able to get into what he calls the core, which is basically the God dimension, the God realm, where God resides. And that woman that he was with was still with him and is acting as a sort of translator between him and God. And I think that's how it is, but she she morphs into like a spirit or something. Or like, I don't know. I don't quite remember that. The part of it is kind of hazy to me, but he gets a sense that this guy that he's with acts as a translator for between him and God or something like that. So, maybe she's a higher spirit and is able to directly connect with God in a different way that he can't. So that's why she's needed. One interesting thing he did say was like they communicate telepathically. So when the woman was talking to him, it was all telepathic. It wasn't like she had to open her mouth and say those things initially when he met her. And even here in this core realm, it's the same thing where it's like thoughts just enter into your mind and everyone is just able to communicate that way. Telepathic communication, right? And anything that he wanted to know, that knowledge was instantly just given to him. And even now, he says it's going to take him the rest of his life to unpack everything that he learned from this meeting of God and this whole experience, I guess. So I don't know if that means there will be future books coming out. I would assume so if he kept to his word, but it was interesting the kind of fundamental things that he did say about the meaning of life while he was there. And to his understanding is that, yes, reincarnation is real, and that Earth is designed, and by design, and this universe is designed to allow for experiences for spirits. So after we die, we are all going back to heaven, which is where, the beautiful land exists and that girl was, to regroup with our souls. It's called a soul group, right? And that an interesting thing across a lot of these NDE experiences is people refer to this place, and it's different. It's, again, subjective to each person. Whatever this heaven looks like, whether it's just a space of emptiness or there's a field, whatever. In his example, it was like a field, like an earth-like field of plants, and he didn't really describe animals. He did say there was butterflies, and angelic beings that he couldn't quite describe, which again, interesting. But from what I've gathered, everyone's experience is subjective. It's never the same. It's not like everyone goes to the same field, everyone has the same experiences, and then goes talk to God. It's all different. So, and I think that's I don't. We'll get into that later, but anyways, so he has. So everyone dies and goes to his heaven and meets with their soul group. And across all these NDEs, people refer to this place as home. Whatever it is, whatever it looks like to them, they immediately associate it with home. And what's interesting is everyone, it's like without question, they know where they're at, who they're talking to, without question. Now, Eben, Alexander, didn't know who this girl was. And part of it was he thinks it was because of his. Well, I actually I don't really know. I mean, I do know who that girl ends up being, but he didn't know who this girl was. But he did know immediately. He associated this feeling of home, being home, without anyone telling him that he's home. He just knew that he was home, and like when he went to the core realm, he just knew that he was talking to God. It wasn't like it didn't have to be explained to him. So anyone who enters this afterlife as a spirit, if you want to call it that, they immediately associate and immediately recognize characters who they probably shouldn't know, and this feeling and sense of home and unconditional love. That's a big, big, big feeling across all these. And then there's also a life review where you experience everything that you've done in your life again, but if usually through the perspective of others. So if you impacted someone in some way, you would see it from their perspective and feel it from their perspective. So if you were doing bad stuff to people who may or may not have been deserving, either way, you would feel their pain that you inflicted on them. The fear that they felt, the physical pain that they felt if you beat them or whatever. So Eben describes how there isn't really a need for hell, and that this is sort of enough for any one person to reform and have a come to Jesus kind of moment with themselves. And it's interesting because across a lot of these other NDEs, people who did have a bad outlook and bad behavior in life towards others, they typically reform, most of the time, reform into a better version of themselves, and they're way more empathetic because they felt and done, they've gone through their life review, so they know, what it was like when they said those things to people, and it really has a big impact on them. What I find interesting is just how similar a lot of these NDEs are. I mean, it's just like, is this just built into our genetic code to have this reflective moment with ourselves? Like our lizard brain just saying, right before death, we're just going to review everything real quick and try to gather everything that we've done. Why would that matter if you're dying, in a conventional sense, But in the sense of like moving on to the next phase of your life after you've died, that would make sense because that would call for a life review or something like that. But so that's interesting to me because to say that scientifically this was just built into our DNA, and like, oh, you're just having a DMT experience. It's like, that doesn't sound like a DMT experience at all. At all. Like, to some extent, yeah, sure, but explain everyone's reformation on this stuff, and they they then see things that they weren't able to see as through this experience. And I do know like drugs can sort of emulate some of that stuff. So yeah, okay, to some extent that can seem and feel like a psychedelic experience, but my other thing is like, what if psychedelics kind of bridges that consciousness? If we are spirits in reality, these are just bodily. These bodies are just vessels for us to experience things, like Eben said, and so our consciousness is totally separate from the body. The body doesn't create consciousness, but the consciousness entered the body, right? That sort of thing. And maybe psychedelics kind of opens up another channel that brings us to our real selves, our consciousness, and that's why we sometimes with these DMT experiences we reflect kind of like an NDE. But what isn't psychedelic and what isn't a DMT trip is Eben's experience, in where he later says he can experience or travel between all these different realms. He said he did before he was brought back into his body. He did go into the earthworm's eye view, but even before that, he was able to travel from this heaven realm back to the core, back to other dimensions even that he didn't quite get into, but this back and forth and this consistency. A real crazy psychedelic experience, what most people are used to, are just seeing wacky shit that doesn't have any cohesion, it doesn't make sense. It could just be random, like if this was the fact that nothing has changed significantly between his travels between back and forth, and nothing is wild or crazy in a lot of these DMT experiences, that it's cohesive and it's usually there's something that they learn and take from it, is astounding to me. Why wasn't on his trip back to this heavenly realm, or the entire time that he was there, why didn't the grass sink in and turn to a different color, and snakes and stuff formed out of the grass and started slithering everywhere, and then they grew wings and flew off? Like, why didn't just absurd shit happen? Like, why was it all cohesive and everything had a place? Just kind of like everything has a place here on Earth. There's laws of physics that govern it, and so it almost seems like these places that they go to have laws of physics that govern them, and there's an order to these places. So that's, to me, what separates an NDE from a psychedelic experience. And I think maybe psychedelics can open that bridge to this consciousness. I don't know. That's just me speculating. But anyways, there's a lot to take away from his experiences and all that. And oh yeah, going back to what he was saying about our experiences here on Earth and how it's just a short, limited time. Well, he says, well, this justifies the reason why there's so much pain and suffering and all this, because it's all temporary. It's not, none of this is meant to be taken too serious because it's just play. It's all just fake, really. It's just a video game. It's just a simulation, right? This simulation is a vessel in which we can experience things that you normally wouldn't in a heaven-like place, which makes sense. My thing was my other thought experiment is just assume there's a hyper advanced civilization out there. Well, there probably is. I mean, let's be real, in our universe. And there's a multitude of them. Some will go down the path of just keep advancing technology, keep exploring stars and galaxies, go on to the next, go on to the next, so on and so forth. But what if an advanced civilization took a different path? And instead of exploring and doing the same thing over and over again, like once you get to a point where you've learned everything you've learned in this universe, and now you're just kind of sandboxing. I mean, you can build Dyson spheres around stars and gather all the energy from them, and you can destroy planets with a single laser, and you can change the environment and the weather patterns on a planet, and you can even restructure the planet. You could even restructure molecules and atoms, and you could do just anything. You could play God at this point. Your area becomes your sandbox of the universe, right? Whatever corner of the universe that you're in, it's a sandbox. And you've done everything there is. You've played with the sand enough. Now it's just like, what do you do? Well, to me, a lot of motivation behind stuff, I think, comes from boredom. When we get bored, we kind of start thinking about other things. And what if, just a thought experiment, the same thing happens with this advanced civilization? They get bored. And they kind of want a new challenge. They want to do something different. What do? Well, at this point, they can create any simulation that they want with quantum computers and whatever advanced technology. Maybe they don't even have quantum computers. Maybe they have something more advanced than that can simulate a reality. Right? Their own universe doesn't take up a lot of power or anything, but a lot of them, maybe not, or maybe all of them, decide to follow the same path. Let's just resimulate a universe. Create our own, set the rules, start over. I want to play as a caveman, or a primitive version of our species. See what that was like. We have a good idea of what that looks like because we've run simulations and we have a really good history of a logbook of the events that took place. So we can kind of resimulate that. But I want to play as a character that doesn't know a whole lot. I'm rediscovering fire and I'm rediscovering how to make tools and weapons and all this stuff. That is more interesting than carrying on with cheat codes and God mode, basically. I mean, in any video game that you play, you kind of get to that point where it's like, if you have unlocked everything in this video game, you've done everything, unless there's more to discover, different types of endings that you can have, and I mean, if you've done everything, you're going to kind of drop the game and move on to something else, or you're going to want to start over, right? But it won't help that you aren't amnesiac. Is that the right word? Amnesiac? You don't have a form of amnesia, so even though you restart the game, you're still going to remember how to get all those things and how the story ends and all the different endings. So that doesn't really give you the full experience anymore. So something that Eben was saying is when we enter these life forms from our consciousness, we are given a dose of amnesia. It's designed that way so we don't remember who we really are in the spirit realm and all the knowledge that we've gathered there. We don't have any recollection of that because it will mess with the simulation. Just like an advanced civilization recreating their simulation, or a simulation, doesn't have to be theirs, but just a simulation, they would want the same thing. They want to fully immerse themselves in this experience. To me, I think that makes sense. I could totally see an advanced civilization going down that route. Why wouldn't it? And maybe that explains part of the reason why we don't see anything out there when we were looking out into the universe. That's part of the Fermi paradox, is like, why aren't we seeing anything? And there's a multitude of answers and reasons, speculation. They're not real answers. They're speculations as to why that's the case. I think maybe that's one of them. Some other reasons would be like, well, we just don't have the equipment. We're not using the right kind of equipment because an advanced race at this level would communicate differently. Maybe they don't want to be seen because there's other threats out there, and so we shouldn't be waving around a banner saying, hey, we're over here in this corner because there's a bigger looming threat that everyone's purposely trying to avoid because they know about it, and this civilization isn't friendly. They eat other civilizations. They conquer them for the resources, whatever. That's besides the point. But for me, I think that's a possible reason as to why we're not seeing stuff is because they all start to look in at some point rather than out because they've already looked out, and they have a system that'll be self-sustained for millions of years. They have robots to provide life support systems while they're in this stasis chamber of simulation, and everything is functioning in the background. They don't have to worry. They could literally be in the stasis chamber for hundreds or thousands or millions of years because they're at that level where everything is self-sufficient without their involvement or whatever. You just picture that, something like that. I don't know, but anyways, that boredom makes sense to me. And going back to this NDE thing, if this is objective reality, everything that Eben described, maybe we're just doing this out of boredom. We, as spirits, have learned so much. We've done what everything, and so this is a way to kind of escape. This is kind of like a vacation away from knowing everything. This is a fun thing to do while you're away. And again, I'm not trying to disregard the problems that we have on this planet and all that stuff, because there's a lot of pain and suffering. Obviously, my videos previous, I'll talk about these issues. So I'm not blind to the idea of the pain and suffering that goes on, but something that I also think about is, in a simulation, if you run one without pain and suffering and everything's blissfully fine, then you're running a simulation with no consequences. And not having consequences, it's very easy to take things for granted. That's going to happen. You can touch the stove and not be hurt. You never have to worry about pain or suffering, and then so nothing is put into perspective. You don't have more appreciation for your life. You don't this and that. So I think having this level of threat, this constant level of threat, brings gratitude. It brings more meaning into your life and everyone else's life. So there kind of has to be pain and suffering in order for others to enjoy it, which sounds really fucked, I understand, but that's kind of, it has to work that way. I don't see it working any other way. You might as well just be in heaven if that's the case. And even then, wouldn't that just kind of get boring after a while? If just like, everything's fine, nothing can go wrong here forever. And that was another thing I talked about in one of my previous videos. So it's just like, what do you do? You have to create a universe with consequences. So I think that's maybe it for us. That's what this is, more or less. Eben says, well, it seems like more or less there's a hierarchy, because he said there's other angelic beings that he couldn't describe, and he felt like they were of higher, of a higher hierarchy. But then other entities describe how there's no hierarchy. It's just God and heaven and other spirits. But I don't know. What's interesting to me is, just like I was talking about subjectivity, it seems like we all have a subjective experience as well going into this afterlife, which is also interesting. And I almost feel like heaven, or whatever place you go to, is very moldable. It's not one thing. Maybe it is in some planes of existence, but maybe it's just subjective to you. So yeah, there's this meet and greet area with all of your souls and your soul group, but the way you see things around you in that realm may be different than the way that they see things. Again, you might see you might all be in a field of grass and animals and all this, but to another soul in your soul group, maybe you're standing on an icy area, or it's just ice and nothing but ice. I don't know. Maybe it's different for every individual, right? But it seems like heaven is moldable. I don't think, what I've gathered, there's no one objective truth to what this experience feels and looks like. Everyone's story is slightly different. And what's interesting to me is those that go through NDE experiences from different cultures and stuff, not just the Western, they see things that are more catered towards their belief, which is really weird. I don't know how to describe that. I mean, if your belief system is Hinduism or Buddhism, or if it's Christianity, you would see Jesus Christ. If you were Muslim, you wouldn't. If you're atheist, it would just be a ball of light, kind of like Eben's example. Like, he didn't see Jesus or anything like that. It was just light, all-encompassing light. So everyone within that has a different experience, but it's all kind of like subjective and caters towards their beliefs. So I guess one way, now that I think about it, to kind of describe that is maybe some of the memories that you have here on Earth seep into that immediate next stage of the afterlife, of like there's some influence. And what Eben was saying, and that makes a lot of sense, is if you were clinically dead, he's saying that there's no proof that memories are stored even in the brain. So maybe right after you die, whatever biases that you have, because your memory isn't stored in the brain, you don't have to worry about leaving your memories behind. They go with you. They're part of your consciousness. That those biases immediately are with you in that moment. So when you're experiencing your NDE, your life review, you will have those biases still there, even though this is just an illusion, because it's based upon your human experience that you had, and some of those human biases are getting in the way of your experience that you're having. It has a form of altering what you're seeing. And maybe if you were to have permanently died, maybe that illusion would eventually be lifted off and you would see more of an objective idea, and that is just kind of this God entity is just a ball of light, and it's not actually Jesus Christ, and it's not actually Allah, and it's not actually whatever you believed in, Zeus, and that it's more of an objective idea, if that even exists in heaven, if there's such thing as objectivity. If you could almost use Eben as an example, because he comes from or he tries to come from an objective standpoint, and before he died he was pragmatic. Like, he didn't lean any other way. So maybe again his is a great basis for kind of what it's more or less supposed to look like. I don't know. My personal guess is that heaven is moldable. I don't think it's one way or the other. Whether or not we see it differently, I don't know. But if we're talking about a realm that is created by God himself, then it could be anything, literally. So why can't it be moldable? So that would kind of explain some of these other ideas that are going on in my mind. That's how I kind of justify the explanation. But there are just so many parallels, like eerily amount of parallels, that it's hard for me to ignore them. Again, I come from a very practical, pragmatic background, and like, it's just, there's too much evidence here for me to just dismiss it as a bodily function, process going on that is creating this illusion that they're all seeing. So I do think there's something more. What Eben was saying explains so many of the questions that I had at the beginning of this video that I've been talking about, is the idea of what are the chances of being here? Well, if, again, you can roll the dice as many times as you want, then that explains it. Well, this dice being rolled is actually true selves as souls coming down to experience life as as an entity. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person. Could be another living thing. Could be another species entirely on another planet. An alien of some sort. Just whatever. That solves that problem. And he also says, there is no judgment from this God, which I could never subscribe to any biblical God that was written in a book 2,000 years ago. It just never made sense to me. Like, how can God have all these opinions and live as if he's just another person. You know, he sounds so imperfect in the Bible, and I do plan on listening to the entire Bible on Audible, which is like 82 freaking hours, just to open my mind a little bit and see maybe there's some misguided things that some preconceived notions that I had about the Bible. But from what I understand, this God is very flawed. Written in the Bible, he's very temperamental, makes mistakes, and then those mistakes are corrected in the New Testament. These are all just stuff that from what I understand. And people cherry pick things from the Bible all the time to prove their agendas and set their motives and all this stuff, right? So I can't argue with someone who is very much bought in, nor do I want to. I purposely avoid that because once you're set into a belief system, you're just kind of set into it. Just like these conspiracy theorists, it's the same thing. It's hard to get them out of their beliefs, so there's really no point in arguing. And I don't want to. If you believe in these things, as a Christian, as a Muslim, as a Jew, it doesn't matter. Like, that's your belief. If that makes you feel better, if you think God's word is written in every line in this book called the Bible, then that's for you. I don't think that's it. I just think that this book was a collection of human knowledge, that some multitude group of people were working on it. I don't think it's God's word directly because, one, how's that fair to anyone who lived before this book was written? Jesus Christ didn't exactly time it to the dawn of man. It was, several thousands of years after. We were already even civilized too, in which he decided to appear and make these statements and all this. So, like, and then again, with the book being so old, we know stories change over time. And if Jesus Christ came down and said these things, blah, 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 and then the book wasn't written until decades later, a lot of stuff gets lost in translation. We know this. I mean, play the game of phone where you tell someone something verbally and then you tell them to repeat that to someone else. And by the time it gets back to you after the 10th, 20th, 100th person, it gets heavily distorted. That message gets heavily, heavily distorted. This was a experiment that we played out in like the 4th or 5th grade. A very simple concept. So how would that be any different from the writings of the Bible, right? Anyways, just to kind of detract from that, I don't think that this God is the biblical God that we're talking about. I do think there is probably a God. It's one, comforting, sure, but it makes sense that there's a creator behind all these things, because how do you explain anything? It makes sense that it was more intelligently designed by something, and sure, why couldn't it be an alien? Maybe we do live in a simulation where some lizard species, like I described, they got bored and they pressed the play button, and we are just byproducts of that, and their real simulation takes place on another planet somewhere else, but we are the byproducts of that, and we are just experiencing stuff. But that still wouldn't explain the consciousness fact of it. Like, still, why am I here? Why me? It would still kind of go back to that root problem of, like, I had one shot at this simulation, and then once the plug's pulled, it's done and over with. And I had the one shot, and I drew the lottery ticket. Again, it doesn't explain that. So I know Elon Musk talks about, the chance of us being in base reality is 1 in billions. I don't know where he gets that math from, to be honest. I'd love to ask him about that, but I don't know where that comes from, because why does it have to be that? Why can't we be in base reality? Like, okay, assume this. Assume there's an infinite amount of universes being created at an infinite rate. Infinite blah 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 blah. Just universes are being popped into existence and out of existence infinitely, just in this vast space of infinity. And everything is by chance. Okay, everything's random as hell. There's no method to anything. It's just a random fucking mess of universes. Okay, assume that. Okay. In my mind, if we are in a simulation, I think the chances are half. If there's an infinite amount of universes being created, and in half of these universes, or, well, back up. Yeah, I guess just like, yeah, okay, in any one of these universes, advanced civilization gets to a point where they can start creating simulations real enough to simulate another universe. Then you have an infinite amount of those going on. Then wouldn't that just make that equation be half? Wouldn't it just be 50% chance that I'm in base reality, and then we're going up against 50% chance that we're in a simulation? There's an infinite amount of base reality universes being created at the same rate as there's an infinite amount of non-based reality simulations being created. Wouldn't that be just be half, right? But that's assuming that that plane of existence even exists. That there's just a infinite amount of universes being created randomly in just some space, or on some membrane, I guess, as some scientists would describe it. But either way, it just I don't know where he gets 1 in billions from. I just don't know where he gets that number from, and no one seems to have challenged him on that idea. I don't understand, and maybe I'm just not thinking about it the way that they're thinking about it. Well, I think that's the case because to me it's just 50%. And that was my stance for the longest time, is like, okay, 50% chance based reality and 50% simulation. But then nowadays I think it still doesn't solve the problem of why me. It just does not solve that problem, right? Why you, why me, why anyone? To say that we have one chance at this it should be impossible. Should be impossible. If this is a simulation, it doesn't make sense. And if anything, what would make more sense is if we were unplugged from the simulation, we just go back to our base reality of, oh yeah, I'm a highly advanced lizard that got bored and I decided to press play. I'm back in my body. This right here is just an experience. It's just GTA 10 with way better graphics, or whatever the fuck, It's just that would make more sense than, again, just being a Mario character that has no idea that he's in a video game, and once that plug is pulled, it's over. Like, I don't know. To me, this explains, Eben's experience and all these NDE's experiences explains to me pretty much fully on everything. But then here begs, this then adds more questions that I'm going to get into, assuming all this is real, okay? One, yeah, like, okay, what really is the point? He talks about it's all about learning and gathering knowledge, and then we take that knowledge back to ourselves, and then we plan our next visit, or our next experience, I should say, on Earth, maybe somewhere else, with our soul group, and we regroup, regather, and regroup, and do it again. And we're always trying to just get different perspectives, different nuggets of knowledge, I guess, to move up and closer to God is what it sounds like. I don't really know what that means. If there is a hierarchy, why is there a hierarchy? Like, what's the point of that? Again, would we get to a point, even if I'm sitting right next to God and I have almost just as much information on things as he does, again, do I get to replay a simulation? Because I'm going to get bored at some point. Unless it doesn't work that way, unless we're all just drugged up on the happy dose drug where it doesn't matter. I'm always just happy and content with how things are, no matter how complacent I fucking get. Maybe that's the case. We're all just huffing fucking shrooms and we're just fine with it. We're just breathing in this gas that just makes us forget about how bored we are. I don't know. But to me, it just seems like I would just want to start over again. I don't know. That's something that can't be answered, assuming this is all real. Some scarier thought experiments have gone in through my head in terms of like consciousness just as a tool or even a weapon. Like, well, maybe I should say weapon, but how it can be used to severely victimize someone. Okay, so let me get into what I'm talking about because it just sounds insane. So, what I mean by that is, let's assume we can 100% prove the afterlife, the consciousness, and everything that Eben Alexander is saying. Okay, let's just assume we get to that point and we're hundreds of years into the future. Super advanced. It's amazing we've even survived, all that stuff, whatever. And assume that we are able to create an artificial life. Now, does that artificial life, just because it's as intelligent as us, maybe a little less. We program it that way on purpose. But anyways, let's just say it's as intelligent as a human as today, right? We program it to the 21st century level of intelligence in the year 2024, because whatever. So it's got that level of intelligence, okay? And does that mean that we've just created an artificial version of consciousness where it can never have a soul because it's artificially created, but it has the feeling that it does, and this is an actual simulated consciousness. It's not a real. It has no soul. Like, it literally has no soul. And if it knows that, and we know that, what are the implications there? Like, are we going to have less value to its life? Is it going to feel less valuable? It's going to feel segregated. It's going to feel like the things that created me have souls, and they're part of this soul group that I can never be a part of, and I'm not part of that club. And when I die, it's over for me. And I know this, and they know this, and that's why they're making me do all this hard labor or whatever the fuck. It kind of gets into an ethics problem. If that's how that works, maybe if we do create an artificial intelligence, it adds a +1 to us, our soul consciousness, hive mind consciousness that's described. We +1 it basically, so we add it to, so we do end up giving it a soul because it reaches a certain level of consciousness. Or does any level of artificial intelligence that we create is granted a soul, just for the simple fact that it's feels like it's alive? If we create an artificial intelligence of an ant, does that be granted a soul, or is there a certain threshold that it has in terms of intelligence that it has to reach in order to have a soul? Or, I mean, it just adds so many different questions, assuming this is the reality of things, and what are the ethics behind that? Because that can definitely get problematic in terms of segregation, and I don't know, but I could just see how that can be extremely bad for the non-soul group of intelligences, and how sad that can be. So that's just a question that kind of came up, was like, what if you're not part of that club, and what does that mean? Another implication of this consciousness idea that's kind of horrific, and it's not my thought experiment. I don't remember whose it was. And I think there's a book on it. Yeah, there's a book on it. I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically this alien race that really advanced, but they... God, I wish I knew what it was called. I'll look into it. But basically, they just torture people and other aliens, basically, for thousands of years. And I don't know the purpose behind it. I don't know if it's they get something out of it, or it's just... Oh yeah, I think... Oh, okay. So where it stems from, it's coming back to me. There's birds that... There's a bird species here on Earth that will torture and maim the hell out of their prey before they, consume them, and it's just horrific. And then that got into this guy's idea of an alien species that basically does that, right? Just strips you apart and just tortures you, but it does it on a much longer time scale. So, this bird might be torturing something for like minutes at a time, 10, 15 minutes maybe longer, before it finally kills you, or you just finally die. And I know examples of people here on Earth that experience something like that, which is awful. People, like women, getting abused and raped for years. There was an example of that where this woman was put in this creepy fuck's basement, and he had his way with her, and she had children with him, and for like years. I think like 10, 15 years, something ridiculous. And the whole time, it's got to just be torturous, just awful. And this is where the ethics of this consciousness thing comes in. It's like, okay, her limited time on this earth, everyone's limited time on this earth is valuable. And if 10 to 15 years of it is spent in agony, pain, and misery, that's fucking awful, obviously, right? And okay, we all die, and then if our consciousness transfers into something else, you could see how, like, I don't want to say this because it sounds awful, but how nothing really on this earth is too big of a deal because it will end eventually, and it's if you're only on this earth for 80 years, what's 80 years in the time span of infinity, of infinite reincarnations, of infinite experiences? Like when you have to start looking at things at a much bigger picture scale if you want to justify anything, and that's kind of the way you're forced to see it. But what if, going back to this crazy thought experiment of, what if you're in a position where you're getting tortured for not 10, 15 years, not 100 years, not a couple hundred years, not a couple thousand years, maybe not even 100,000 years, but like millions of years? How can you justify that? Is that even possible? Is that even a possibility of a simulation? Is that, I mean, would this God entity interfere at some point? I mean, like, that's terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying to be tortured for millennia at a time, for or millions of years, for billions of years. I mean, till the end of the life of the universe. I mean, that has some real implications there. Yeah, it just brings up more questions than anything. And I guess something he was talking about was like we. It almost seemed like Eben was alluding to the idea that we're creating more souls down here. Because okay, here's another thought experiment: is like, what if? So if we're part of, each there's clusters of soul groups that all are, I guess, supposed to help each other learn something. So everyone plays a certain role for their lives. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means like everything is predestined, pre-planned, and we're literally just playing a movie and we get to choose the characters to play out. Like, oh, I want to play as Elon Musk. He's already a pre-created character, and all the events in his life have already been created, and you get to play as him. And okay, if you're gonna play as him, then I'm gonna play as his associates around him and help build you up. And I'm gonna play as his father. I'm gonna play as his daughter, and that just brings up those kind of questions. So is free will even a thing? That would be a big thing. Like, okay, do we actually have free will? Or are these lessons being learned and they're being created through what we're doing, or is everything already been played out and we're literally just playing through a movie? We can choose the characters and the perspectives of those characters in this movie, but there's the same beginning, middle, and end. That all those sequences are all the same, or are those sequences the same, and we can kind of change the in betweens here and there. Kind of like if you're, for example, if you're playing a linear game, like a first-person shooter, like Halo, for example. There's a beginning, middle, and end. Cutscenes will happen when they happen once you get to a certain point, but between those cutscenes, I'm allowed to go about killing and handling the enemies in those situations differently every time. I can assassinate one, headshot another, and then the next playthrough I can do the reverse or use grenades or keep some alive, don't kill them all. I can kind of manipulate those kind of aspects of it, but I cannot change the outcomes of the cutscenes. That will never change. The ending is always going to be there. Like, is that how that works? It just brings up those kind of questions that cannot be answered. Or are we actively creating characters in which we can choose the outcome? Like there is free will. As time goes on, we are literally manipulating things, and we're able to create the stories in any which way that we want. Right? It's not predetermined, predestined stuff. It's all no. You go out there and you play as these characters, yes, but from then on you create your path. But everyone talks about in these NDAs planning and how this person is supposed to create struggles in your life for you so that way you learn something, and these people are your soul partners and they become romantic partners and you learn a lot from that, or you had this relationship because of this. And it's like it just seems like everything's planned. I don't know what the hell that means. Like, I don't know what that means at all. Again, everything I just described, it could be any one of those things, but somehow this stuff's planned. So interesting concept there. I mean, it makes sense, but how it makes sense, I mean, if it is planned, it would more or less have to play like the Halo thing that I was talking about, and that certain events can be manipulated, but there are events that that you will go through, because how do you coordinate a world where all souls have to coordinate with each other to make this work? I mean, it just seems like a ridiculous amount of planning has to go into this on a huge scale, which wouldn't make sense to me because we're all jumping in and out of this simulation without pre-coordinating this with each other, right? And then I'm told that time works differently in this heaven dimension and other dimensions, which makes sense. I mean, even scientifically, when they break down different potential dimensions, that time would work differently in those. So that makes sense. But still, it wouldn't explain how everything is planned. But yeah, that's a whole thought experiment there. Getting back to the idea that like this whole reincarnation thing justifies pain and suffering. Again, that all makes sense to me. It doesn't diminish or take away anything from these people's lives or anything. But with this death concept and with this concept of rebirth, another thing that kind of brings into question is, and with soul groups. So what if, just hypothetically, my soul group, let's just say it consists of 100 souls. I don't know how big these soul groups can get. Maybe there's bigger clusters of soul groups. Let's just assume mine is 100. What if, during this experience here, because I'm amnesic, and maybe it's part of the plan to work this out, but like I decide to start having a lot of kids to the point where it goes beyond the soul group amount. So out of these 100 that are entering in and influencing my life and helping me along, if I go past 100, in terms of just, because some of these souls are going to be my parents and their parents and the friends around me and the relationships I've had and all this stuff. But if I exceed 100 by adding more from having kids, like a lot, does that add plus? Am I creating new souls? Like, I don't know how that would work. Like, it would almost feel like, I mean, in some way, maybe that's how more souls are created, is through our experiences here and not necessarily through the heaven space. And so that's how you have an infinite amount of souls being created, and you need an infinite amount of worlds. So it's not necessarily that souls come first and then lives are formed. It's more of the other way, or maybe it works kind of together in conjunction, but you can create new souls here. I don't know. It's just like it becomes even more mind-bending at that point, and maybe it's a mix of both. It's like while you're here, you have the power to potentially create more souls on your journey here, and then they're added to your soul group, but these are fresh souls, so they're new in experience. So, and then how does that work? If there is a hierarchy, do I leave those behind if I'm ready to go to the next phase? Like, and then they have to find a new soul group, or I don't know. And it just creates more confusing questions. I'm just the type of person to keep asking questions. Like, it just never stops. So even if I knew those answers, I would probably bring up more questions. Even if I knew everything there is to know, I would find a way to bring up more questions. I'm just that type of person. But going into personality types, it's kind of interesting to think. So something he was kind of saying is like your personality type kind of stays with you. So if I'm the type of personality to be philosophical, which I know I am, is that just innately in me? And is my soul just that way? That's my soul's personality. It's unique to me to be the exact way that I am. And that goes for everyone else, obviously, of course, right? So you have people with personality types to be more math focused, more creator inventors, ones that help people, are really involved with that. But then what does that mean for like serial killers and people like that? Like, are they always going to be that way, or maybe they were just misguided? Maybe it was a brain issue that they had when they were born. And it's just, to some extent, like, yes, your personality, sure, it can stem from your soul and your conscious, but we do know that personalities can be changed and altered here. If you suffer too much brain damage or whatever experiences you go through, can change and manipulate the way that you are, right? That can happen in the middle of your life. You can have something happen to you, a severe brain injury that will completely alter your personality. Or right out the gate, you're just deranged and crazy. So what does that say about those people? Are those brand new souls that are just kind of figuring out? So they're kind of like, they're not really well put together. So they're kind of, they could lean any other way. And if they do end up killing a bunch of people, they, the next life they're more reformed. But then again, it's like, it doesn't make sense to me if the point of learning stuff is you're not taking it. If you go through amnesia, you obviously won't be able to know what you're supposed to take back. And if you die after being a horrible person to other people and potentially killing a bunch of people, and you take that back with you into heaven, you go through your life review, you're like, okay, this is what I learned, yada yada. Do you actively choose the next life so that way you avoid a situation like that? But again, you return with amnesia. So do you just become an upgraded version of your soul, kind of like you're prestiging? You're kind of getting that next gold star. So like your next experience isn't going to be as hard, or it's not going to be filled with more or less the same lessons because you've learned those. So you're on to the next thing. So you choose something that's different. Yeah, I know it's interesting to think of it that way. But from what Eben was saying, it kind of more or less seems like we do have free will here. He kind of very much alludes to the idea that you can change things here, and he didn't. I mean, he said there's a lot of planning involved, yeah, but with you and your soul group, but it is more or less open to and subject to change. You have the power to change things. So again, it's a little hazy, but a lot of NDEers suggest that there's planning involved, which makes sense. It to me it just sounds like a getaway from heaven, is what it sounds like. We kind of plan our vacation spot, and we plan who we're bringing and what we're doing and what we're there to learn. It's just a very complex thing to plan out when there's other souls that aren't part of your soul group that are doing their own thing, and they bump into yours, and do they ruin the experience? I mean, you don't have a chat with them before and say, hey, we're trying to do this, don't interfere with it. And then some guy comes in and interferes with it, marries one of your souls, and then that changes the trajectory of everything. I don't know how that works. It's just too complicated. But going back into how these dimensions would behave and function, well, very much like the thought experiment, which is not something that I thought of, but I think it was Plato or Aristotle, one of those amazing Greek philosophers, were talking about being in a cave with shadows and seeing shadows from outside the cave, right? And you're bound to this cave in shackles, and so you know nothing besides the cave and how it works and how it functions in your life inside of it, and the others that are with you inside of it. But you are free from your shackles, and you're able to go outside this cave and see what all those what was creating all those shadows, and you see other people in a different world, a different landscape, and all this stuff. That's one thought experiment. Another one that's a great one that simplifies it is a 2D character like Mario or something on a sheet of paper goes out of its 2D dimension and into the 3D dimension, and it sees 3D objects and 3D things and different colors, and now that there's a whole nother dimension, it feels different. And then they go back into a 2D world and explain what they saw, just like the guy in the cave explains what he saw when he went out of the cave. How do you explain what you saw using the dimensional language that you're in, the restrictions that you have? So if you are traveling to higher dimensions, which is what it sounds like, it seems like a whole different dimension that you're going into in this heaven realm, you're never going to be able to explain to anyone here how it functions entirely. Like, you can give us an idea, but unless we go there ourselves, we're not ever going to really know. Again, you gain another sense, you gain another ability. You're not bound to a body. So, yeah, the experience is going to be very different. And then some people describe seeing different colors, which is significant to me. I mean, how is it that you could, in any DMT experience ever, how could you see a whole nother color? hear things like Eben said, that are not going to be able to be replicated here, and having different senses and being able to travel between dimensions and using certain melodies to get to those dimensions. And it's just all, unless we are there, we can't experience it. And we'll find out when we die, I suppose. We'll go back to that place that feels like home, that is home. And to me, this idea is very sound and it sounds beautiful. And I love it. I would very much hope that's the reality. And I've always thought that there's more than just this. There's absolute, and I think everyone deep down feels that. But then we asked the question, like, why are NDEs even allowed to happen? Like, it kind of breaks the reality of things if this is the well, not objective, but this is more or less the truth. Like, if we are aware and know that there's some chance of reincarnation, and that's alluded to in heaven and through these NDE experiences, why are these people allowed to relay that back to us? Is it to, each generation gets glimpses of these NDEs, everyone goes through it. They're more prevalent nowadays because people can be saved rather than the way of things were back 2,000 years ago. If you got stung or bit by a snake, you're probably going to die. But now that we have tools to kind of resuscitate people and bring them back, the NDE experiences have increased over time. That's only because of technology. Is it so that every generation, if someone who does go through an NDE, even back in the Greek times, like ancient Greek times, that they can give that generation some hope if that generation's willing to take it seriously? I mean, it's interesting because those people already had their own system of belief, so it's not like it would matter. They already believed in afterlife, so a lot of them did. All of them, actually, basically all of them did. Whatever culture you go to, some belief in an afterlife is present. Is that a social construct, again, to create order and law, or is it just to make us feel better, or is it because we all innately feel like there is? And is that part of our DNA when we were created, just to feel that way, or by the creator to give us some comfort? But it's all open to interpretation at the end of the day. It's all subjective. So, and even with all these NDE experiences, I still am a little skeptical. So, because there's no absolute objective truth to that. And I think this is where science can kind of fail us, because maybe it just can't be discovered. That's not a discoverable subject that we can get into. It's designed that way to, otherwise it would break the immersion, the experience. What would be the point if we could absolutely know what that other side looks like? It can't be scientifically broken down. It never will be. It's designed to stop there. Well, we will reach a certain limit with our science that still cannot and will never be able to explain certain things. And I think the subject of this is more or less one of those things. We can kind of peer into that other side, maybe get an idea through NDEs, but I don't think we're ever designed to know exactly what that's supposed to look like. The science kind of stops there. And that's why everyone's experiences are different. That's why it's hard to nail. If everyone had the exact same experience, then we could all conclusively say, hey, I think there's something there. The fact that it's all subjectively different makes it harder to piece this puzzle together. I think it's part of the design. I don't know, but it's made me really think more about the subject than I ever have. It's kind of gotten me to the next phase of it, because I've gone through phases, kind of in the way that I described, of like kind of getting to a point where it's like, okay, well, it makes more sense that we are in a simulation, and then I'm like, no, I think it's 50-50, but nothing has been able to really describe why we're here. One thing that I absolutely do believe in, if anything, is reincarnation. It's got to be some factor. Even if there's no God to guide us around, it's just random as hell, and as soon as we die, our consciousness just bloops into another living being, whether it's the nearest living object that's coming into existence, or just it's not planned, it's just random. I think some form of that would make sense. If I could reincarnate an infinite amount of times, and I went from an ant to another ant to a cow, back to an ant, back to, it's just random. And eventually I got the really winning lottery of a super conscious, aware human being. Cool, but not guaranteed for my next one. I could go back to an ant, go back to some other thing. Maybe I'll be an alien species somewhere else and have, be even more aware and be more, have more access to more things. I don't know. It just, I think reincarnation, at the very least, is part of this reality, because that would explain the math problem that no one can solve, that I've tried to solve. You kind of factor that in there. And where conventional science will fail is like they'll say, well, that's not conventional science, and it's like, yeah, but neither was Einstein's idea from the get-go. Neither was Newton's. Like, it all took unconventional thinking to get to where you were at. So why assume that now that's unconventional? Like, why is that in the outside the bounds of science? Like, why not look into this stuff? Why put that label on there? Like, you have no right to. It doesn't make sense. Your entire scientific field has been built off of unconventional thinking. It doesn't make sense to say that's too unconventional. That's just hypocrisy. It doesn't make sense to me. And but I think in any field that you go into, that's the kind of issue you run into, is whether it's science or archaeology, history, all these people put themselves in a conventional box where they're like, anything outside of this is crazy. And, to some extent, yeah, that's fine. Witches and magic didn't exist, and it still doesn't exist. To ponder things that we're still not sure of, how can that be too outside the realm of science? Okay, we know for a fact unicorns don't exist, but we don't know for a fact that God and reincarnation exist. You can't disprove that. You can disprove the unicorn, so that's not scientifically conventional. That's crazy, sure. But what about things you can't explain? That should still totally be open up to a scientific study and field of, maybe it should not be closed doors, because the moment we do that, we start to really slow down our progress because we're looking in the wrong area. But this happens in any field. I'm not just picking on science, but like anywhere. Conventional archaeology. You find something crazy that throws everything off. Are you going to be like, well, there needs to be more evidence for that to really be conclusive? Or are you going to just be like, or maybe that's the new conventional way of thinking? It's like, I don't know. It's an interesting concept. Anyways, I think that's kind of all I had on this. It's a lot to tackle. I don't know, just a lot to think of. I just had to get all this, off my chest. I do not want to keep it in my head, because more or less these videos, I'm better at just talking about things than I am just writing stuff down. It was just easier, I should say. I'm not better at, but it's just easy. And if this helps with building blocks for anyone, or for any lines of thinking, I want it out there, and then we can just kind of bounce ideas off each other and really try to pinpoint an idea that makes the most sense out of all these ideas that are being thrown out there, not just from me, but from everyone. Just to have an idea out there. All great ideas start with something, and all ideas help move things forward. Even if the idea is crazy, absurd, it's at least something. Our entire civilization has been built on ideas, good or bad, malicious, not malicious. They're ideas, and that is one of the greatest gifts that we have as a human, is we can have an idea on things and then build off of that. So here's my idea, and we can maybe build off of it or put it under the rug. Either way, it's something. It's just some contribution to something. Yeah, if I have anything else on this, I will expand on it, but I think I got basically everything I wanted to say out of there. I think that's it. That's all I had. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.